Enlargements of thyroid gland are of common occurrence in females, and the upward movement during deglutition is almost diagnostic. During examination, we have to see whether the goiter is diffuse, multinodular, or a single nodule, whether it is toxic or non-toxic, and benign or malignant. Around puberty, entire gland hypertrophies slightly and in some cases remains quite prominent for 3 to 4 years. This is called puberty goiter. If it is too large or persists after the age of 20 years, then it has to be removed. This is a single nodule on one side. Though clinically it is a single nodule, there may be many small nodules in the gland. That is a multinodular goiter with a single large nodule. If the rest of the thyroid gland is palpable, then clinically we consider it as a multinodular goiter with a single large nodule. This is a multinodular goiter with enlargement of both the lobes and the isthmus. These goiters are common in endemic areas with iodine deficiency. Multinodular goiters can sometimes grow very big. This particular multinodular goiter had compressed the trachea and was causing respiratory stridor. The trachea had become so compressed and soft that this girl needed a tracheostomy for a few days after removal of the gland. When such a large goiter is seen, malignancy also should be kept in mind. Watch the slight upward movement during deglutition. It will not move up freely, mainly due to its weight. If the goiter is hard or rapidly growing, especially if the patient is old, then malignancy has to be suspected. The signs of malignancy are rapid growth, hard consistency, fixity to the surrounding tissues, and inability to feel carotid pulsations. Note the white sclera beneath the limbus between cornea and lower eyelid. If the eyes are prominent, if the patient has tremors, and if the pulse is faster than 100 per minute, suspect thyrotoxicosis and refer the patient for serum T3, T4 investigations. If the swelling is in the midline, it may be a thyroglossal cyst, which also moves up on deglutition. But the characteristic feature of a thyroglossal cyst is that it moves upwards on protruding the tongue. Keeping the mouth open, the patient is asked to protrude and retract the tongue and watch the movement of the swelling with the tongue. Here is another case of thyroglossal cyst. See its midline location, much higher than the thyroid isthmus, its slight movement on deglutition, and the upward movement on protrusion of the tongue. The movement is better appreciated by holding the swelling as the patient protrudes the tongue. Single or multiple glands in the neck are also very common. In a child or young adult, they are usually tuberculous. In an elderly person, think of malignancy. Then there are less common causes like lymphomas, Hodgkin's, which will be diagnosed on biopsy. When you see multiple scars and sinuses in the neck, the diagnosis is obvious: tuberculosis. Start anti-TB treatment and sinuses will close and glands will disappear. If the glands or sinuses persist after antituberculosis treatment, then they have to be excised. Here is another case of tuberculous cervical lymphadenopathy, and you can see a cold abscess behind the mastoid process which needs to be incised and scraped, and there are multiple scars of old ruptured cold abscesses. Here is another child with a cold abscess over the medial end of the right clavicle, and you can see a bead of pus coming out of its center. Cold abscess in the neck may not necessarily be from underlying lymph nodes. Sometimes it may be tracking from a tuberculous lesion of the cervical spine. This is a typical tuberculous ulcer, a sequelae to a ruptured cold abscess. See the undermined edge which I am raising with the help of a pinhead. Undermined edge usually means a tuberculous ulcer. Now see this sinus at the junction of the middle third and lower third of the right sternomastoid muscle. This is a congenital branchial sinus. The position of the sinus is diagnostic. It tracks upwards to the foramen cecum at the base of the tongue and has to be excised completely. If there is a sinus anywhere on the mandible, then the most likely cause is a carious tooth with root abscess. A simple tooth extraction will cure such a sinus. This is a submandibular swelling, which may be due to a submandibular lymph node or enlargement of the submandibular salivary gland. This is a case of submandibular salivary gland enlargement. Particularly see the stretched fibers of platysma causing folds in the skin just below the swelling. This is termed as the platysma sign. It suggests infiltration or fixity to subcutaneous tissues. Platysma sign is suggestive of malignancy. Watch the relation of the swelling to the mandible. Here is another case of malignant neck swelling with infiltration of the skin and positive platysma sign. This patient had malignant lymphadenopathy. Watch how the skin is infiltrated. This is a case which we have already seen, but now note the submandibular lymph node which is secondary to the growth in the cheek. That stresses an important clinical rule that whenever there is a lymph node in the anterior triangle of the neck, you must carefully examine the oral cavity, the tongue, cheeks, pharynx and larynx to look for an infection or growth. Now here we see a right supraclavicular lymph node enlargement. When supraclavicular lymph node is enlarged, X-ray of the chest must be taken to look for a primary growth in the lung. Supraclavicular lymph node also drains the larynx, trachea, esophagus, chest wall, and arm. This is left supraclavicular lymph node or the Furchow's lymph node, which receives lymph from the abdomen also via the thoracic duct. One must specially investigate this patient for carcinoma of stomach and liver when left supraclavicular lymph node is enlarged. And as we see in this case, supraclavicular lymph node enlargement may be secondary to carcinoma of breast also. See the malignant ulcer of the left breast with the nipple drawn towards it. And here we see a lymph node mass in the neck with fungation. Fungation is a sign of advanced malignancy. Now in this child, we see a visible lump in the right loin, which may be arising from the kidney, colon or liver, or it may be an abscess in the abdominal wall. But it is moving with respiration, that means it is intra-abdominal. Here you will see that it is bimanually palpable. I can palpate it between two hands simultaneously. So it is probably renal. Now I am demonstrating ballotment by giving a push by the posterior hand. The lump touches the upper hand and falls back. That is, it is ballotable. And fingers can be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin, which clearly rules out a liver swelling. Watch the lower margin of the lump and movement with respiration. This is a huge splenomegaly, diagnosed from its typical site, typical shape, movement on respiration, and the notch on the anterior border. And in contrast to a renal lump, fingers cannot be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin. Now this swelling is arising from under the left costal margin and is almost reaching the right iliac fossa. Such a huge splenomegaly is seen in leukemias and sometimes in malaria and Kala Azar. Small spleens are typically seen in typhoid fever and malaria. This is another case of huge splenomegaly. There are branding marks over the abdomen, a very common finding in the villagers. The lower border has crossed the umbilicus, and I am demonstrating the notch in the anterior border, which is a diagnostic feature of enlarged spleen. This is a lump arising from the pelvis. If a pelvic lump is freely mobile, then it is an ovarian cyst. And if it is not so mobile, think of uterine lump like fibroids. This lump is very mobile, an ovarian cyst. Ultrasound examination will be diagnostic. Central and uniform lumps arising from the pelvis are usually from uterus, as in pregnancy. But this one wasn't. What else could it be? On introducing a urinary catheter, 2.5 liters of urine were drained and the lump disappeared. This was the largest bladder I have ever seen to date. But I am showing this case to stress a very important clinical rule that any pelvic lump must always be examined after emptying the bladder. Epigastric lumps are either from the liver or from the stomach, so they should be investigated accordingly with ultrasound and gastroscopy. But this lump looks peculiar. If you see carefully, it is pulsatile. Any large lump in this area, if it is sitting on the aorta, can transmit the pulsations of aorta and appear pulsatile. So transmitted pulsations should be differentiated from expansile pulsations by examining in knee elbow position or by demonstrating the expansile nature. Watch how the fingers move away with each pulsation. This was an aneurysm of aorta. And here I am showing an ultrasound picture of the same lump to bring before your eyes the expansile nature of the pulsations. Now watch this case of intestinal obstruction. See the distended bowel coils with visible peristalsis. This is a sign of intestinal obstruction. Watch the peristaltic waves moving along the distended bowel coils. Now watch the epigastrium of this patient. You can see a peristaltic wave moving very slowly from left to right. A classical picture of pyloric stenosis. Watch as the wave starts in the left hypochondrium. It has crossed the midline now, and now it's reached the right hypochondrium. At the same time, another wave has started in the left hypochondrium. The next wave has reached the midline now, and now it is approaching the right hypochondrium. A classical case of pyloric stenosis. When there is a generalized distension of abdomen, think of ascites. This is a case of massive ascites. You can also see an umbilical hernia. In mild to moderate ascites, a laughing umbilicus would have been seen. See the distended veins and see the gynecomastia. The gynecomastia is due to increased levels of estrogen in cirrhosis of liver. The diagnosis is obvious: cirrhosis with portal hypertension, ascites and gynecomastia. This is another patient of ascites with early flapping tremors suggestive of the onset of hepatic failure. And here is a boy with cirrhosis and ascites. Note the transversely stretched or laughing umbilicus. When the scar of a previous laparotomy starts bulging on straining, it is a scar hernia. This is a subumbilical midline scar, and watch the impulse on cuffing. Scar hernia occurs due to failure of the inner layers, that is rectus sheath and peritoneum, to unite, with a resultant gap through which the intestines and omentum start bulging. This is another case of scar hernia through a transverse or Pfannenstein incision. No incision is immune to develop scar hernia. Here is a epigastric scar hernia following a vagotomy gastrojejunostomy for duodenal ulcer about 2 years back. As the patient sits up or strains, the hernia bulges out. And here we see a scar hernia through the drain site after a laparotomy 3 years back. What I am trying to impress upon you is that any scar can result in a scar hernia, especially if there was post-operative infection, post-operative straining or debility and poor healing.